Republicans recently passed a bill to eliminate early voting on Sunday, a day when many church-going African Americans participate in voter drives known as Souls to the Polls. What an astonishing coincidence. Outlaw voting on a day when African American churches sponsor Get Out the Vote efforts. I'd like one of the Republican members on this committee to give us a plain sense justification for that restriction. No early voting on Sundays. Why did Georgia Republicans outlaw it? Monday through Saturday, legitimate voters show up. But Sunday is voter fraud day. Give me a break.
Georgia Republicans passed a law eliminating early voting on Sundays. Just Sundays. And Senator Chuck Schumer just stood up on the Senate floor and pointed out what he called the most astonishing coincidence in modern American politics. Sunday is the day African American churches across Georgia organize voter drives, known as Souls to the Polls. Tens of thousands of black voters showing up to cast their ballots after Sunday service. And Georgia Republicans looked at that and said, no more Sunday voting. Schumer looked across the chamber and asked his Republican colleagues for one single justification. Monday through Saturday, voters show up and it is fine. But Sunday is suddenly voter fraud day? He said, give me a break. And that was just one state, because what Schumer laid out across the entire country is something the media has barely touched. This is what the cameras caught.
Political conflict to achieve even those basic dignities and establish the United States as a full democracy worthy of the title. Progress in the right to vote is a hallmark of this democracy. When the nation was founded, you had to be a white male Protestant property owner in many of the states. So a very small if we kept those rules into effect, let's not change things, we maybe would have 5% or 10% of the American people voting. But no, our move to equality, our move to fairness has been inexorable. But it didn't happen on its own. It took mighty movements and decades of fraught political conflict to achieve those basic dignities and establish the United States, as I said, as a full democracy worthy of the title. But any American who thinks that the fight for a full and fair democracy is over is sadly and sorely mistaken. Today, now, in the 21st century, there is a concerted, nationwide effort to limit the right of American citizens to vote and to truly have a voice in their own government. In the wake of the November elections, one of the safest in recent history, Republican-led state legislatures have seized on the former president's big lie that the election was stolen and introduced more than 250 bills in 43 states aimed at tightening voting rules under the guise of election integrity. Instead of doing what you should be doing when you lose an election in a democracy, attempting to win over those voters in the next election, Republicans instead are trying to disenfranchise those voters. Shame on them. In Iowa, where college students often rely on the flexibility provided by early and mail-in voting, the Republican legislature voted to cut early voting by 9 days, close polls an hour earlier, and tighten rules on absentee voting. In Wisconsin, where urban and rural precincts face vastly different administrative burdens, Republicans have proposed limiting ballot drop boxes to only one municipality, no matter what its size. Could be 10,000 voters in a rural Republican county or 500,000 voters in an urban Democratic county, one ballot drop box. In Arizona, no fewer than 22 separate measures to limit voting rights have been introduced, including a bill to require every absentee ballot to be notarized. How are poor people going to pay for a notary when there's virtually no indication of fraud? It's one of the most despicable things I have seen in all my years. Shame, shame, shame. Other things in Arizona? 2 bills to ban automatic voter registration and same-day registration, even though neither practice exists in Arizona. And the most reprehensible effort of all might be found in Georgia, where Republicans recently passed a bill to eliminate early voting on Sunday, a day when many church-going African Americans participate in voter drives known as Souls to the Polls. What an astonishing coincidence. Outlaw voting on a day when African American churches sponsor Get Out the Vote efforts. I'd like one of the Republican members on this committee to give us a plain sense justification for that restriction. No early voting on Sundays. Why did Georgia Republicans outlaw it? Monday through Saturday, legitimate voters show up. But Sunday is voter fraud day. Give me a break. Every one of us, Democrat, Republican, liberal, and conservative, knows what the Georgia legislature is doing. They don't even have a good justification for it. This is infuriating. I would like to ask my Republican colleagues, why are you so afraid of democracy? Why, instead of trying to win voters over that you lost in the last election, are you trying to prevent them from voting? Our country has come a long way, supposedly, since African Americans in the South were forced to guess the number of jelly beans in a jar in order to vote. But some of these voter suppression laws in Georgia and other Republican states smack of Jim Crow rearing its ugly head once again. It is 160 years since the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments abolished slavery, and Jim Crow still seems to be with us. The laws, their various cousins in Republican state legislatures across the country, are one of the greatest threats we have to modern democracy in America. According to the Washington Post, these laws could strain every available method of voting for tens of millions of Americans, the most sweeping contradiction of ballot access in the United States since the end of Reconstruction. If one political party believes that when you lose an election, the answer isn't to win more votes, but rather to try and prevent the other side from voting, we have an existential threat to democracy on our hands. If we don't stop these vicious and often racist actions, third world autocracy like Erdogan's Turkey or Orban's Hungary will be on its way. That is why the country so badly needs S1, a bill that would combat all of these voter suppression efforts, a bill that would make it easier, not harder, to vote by automatically registering American voters when they get a driver's license, by guaranteeing at least 15 continuous days of early voting, a bill that would limit dark money and corruption in our politics, and much more. We're going to hear from my fellow Democratic committee members why the bill is so important. And I expect we're going to hear the same tired canards from our Republican colleagues, many of which have no basis in fact, most of which defy belief. We're going to hear that this bill, gasp, register Americans to vote, is a Democratic power grab. We're going to hear that it's a federal takeover of our elections. Never mind that the founders, who my Republican colleagues invoke when it's time to confirm a right-wing judge, wrote in the Constitution, that the Congress has the power to pass laws to determine the time, place, and manner of federal elections. We've been down this road before. Opponents of voting rights throughout history have always said, leave it to the states. Just leave it to the states to discriminate against African Americans, Latinos, Native Americans, younger Americans in college. It is shameful our Republican colleagues are proposing these ideas in 2020, the same kinds of states' rights that have been used from time immemorial to prevent certain people from voting. Shame, shame, shame. This is not an usual political argument. This goes to the core of our democracy. The crowning achievement of the American Civil Rights Movement was a federal election law. You might know it better as the Voting Rights Act. Federal, bipartisan. The truth is that we have passed scores of federal election laws and amended our Constitution to guarantee the franchise to our citizens, often bipartisan, led by Republican presidents. The Voting Rights Act of 1965, the National Voter Registration Act of 1993, the Help America Vote Act of 2002, the 14th, 15th, 19th, 23rd, 24th, and 26th Amendments, all election changes. That's because in a democracy, it shouldn't matter if a state wants to make it so onerous for a particular group to vote that it's nigh impossible. Is requiring a notary public any different than asking people to guess the number of jelly beans in a jar? I guarantee you the motivation is exactly the same. It shouldn't matter if a state wants to do it, if it's so wrong, so against the grain of our democracy. Voting rights are sacrosanct. They must be inviolable. And if Congress has to pass a law or amend the Constitution to protect the voting rights of our citizens, that's what we should do. That's what we must do. That's what our democracy requires we do. S1, the For the People Act, will be a priority in this Congress. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Senator Chuck Schumer took the Senate floor and opened with a history lesson. He reminded the chamber that when this country was founded, only white male Protestant property owners could vote, a tiny fraction of the population. He said if America had never changed those rules, perhaps 5 or 10% of citizens would be voting today. But the country moved toward equality, inexorably, he said. Not on its own, it took mighty movements and decades of brutal political conflict to get there. And then he said, anyone who thinks that fight is over is sadly and sorely mistaken. Because right now, in the 21st century, Schumer said, there is a coordinated nationwide effort to limit the right of American citizens to vote. In the wake of the 2020 election, which he called one of the safest in recent history, Republican-led state legislatures seized on what he called the former president's big lie that the election was stolen, and introduced more than 250 bills across 43 states aimed at tightening voting rules under the guise of election integrity. He said instead of doing what any party should do after losing an election, trying to win those voters back, Republicans were trying to make sure those voters could never vote again. Shame on them, he said. Then he went state by state. Iowa, Republicans voted to cut early voting by 9 days, close polls an hour earlier, and tighten rules on absentee voting, hitting college students the hardest. Wisconsin, Republicans proposed limiting ballot drop boxes to just one per municipality, regardless of size. One drop box for a rural county of 10,000 people. One drop box for an urban county of 500,000. The same number, one. Arizona, no fewer than 22 separate measures to restrict voting rights introduced in a single session, including a bill requiring every absentee ballot to be notarized. Schumer asked directly, how are poor people supposed to pay for a notary when there is virtually no evidence of fraud to justify it? He called it one of the most despicable things he had seen in all his years in the Senate. Shame, shame, shame. Also in Arizona, 2 bills to ban automatic voter registration and same-day registration for practices that do not even exist in Arizona. And then Georgia. Schumer called it the most reprehensible effort of all. Georgia Republicans passed a bill eliminating early voting on Sundays. He pointed out that Sunday is the day African-American churches across the state organize souls to the polls, voter drives where congregations go directly from Sunday service to cast their ballots. He challenged any Republican on the committee to provide a single legitimate justification for why Sunday voting specifically needed to be eliminated. He said every person in that room, Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, knows exactly what the Georgia legislature was doing, and they do not even have a good excuse for it. Then Schumer turned the question on his Republican colleagues directly. Why are you so afraid of democracy? Why, instead of trying to win over voters you lost, are you trying to stop them from voting altogether?
He said the country had supposedly come a long way since the days when Black Americans in the South were forced to guess the number of jelly beans in a jar to qualify to vote. But he said these new voter suppression laws, in Georgia and across Republican states, smelled like Jim Crow rearing its ugly head all over again, 160 years after the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. And Jim Crow, he said, still seems to be with us. He cited the Washington Post, which reported these laws could strain every available method of voting for tens of millions of Americans, calling it the most sweeping rollback of ballot access since the end of Reconstruction. Schumer said if one political party decides that losing an election means not winning more votes, but preventing the other side from voting at all, that is an existential threat to democracy itself. He warned that without action, third world autocracy on the level of Erdogan's Turkey or Orban's Hungary would be on its way to America. That is why he said the country needed S1, the For the People Act, a bill that would automatically register voters when they get a driver's license, guarantee at least 15 continuous days of early voting, limit dark money in politics, and much more. He anticipated the Republican response. He said they would call it a Democratic power grab, a federal takeover of elections, and he pushed back immediately, pointing out that the founders themselves wrote into the Constitution that Congress has the explicit power to pass laws governing the time, place, and manner of federal elections. This was not a new idea. It was in the document Republicans claim to revere. He listed the federal election laws that had already been passed on a bipartisan basis throughout American history: the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the National Voter Registration Act of 1993, the Help America Vote Act of 2002, Constitutional Amendments 14, 15, 19, 23, 24, and 26, all of them federal interventions in voting rights, all of them now considered pillars of American democracy. He closed with a single comparison. Is requiring a notary public for an absentee ballot really any different than asking someone to guess the number of jelly beans in a jar? He said he guaranteed the motivation behind both was exactly the same. Voting rights are sacrosanct, he said. They must be inviolable. And if Congress has to pass a law or amend the Constitution to protect them, that is exactly what must happen. The For the People Act, he declared, would be a priority. And with that, Senator Chuck Schumer yielded the floor.